Hello, my name is Dr. Eric Dover. Today we have here Mr. Michael Brooks. Hi, Mike.
Good morning.
How you doing today? You're here as a whistleblower. Please tell us a little bit about yourself here.
I was actually an engineer at Honeywell, Intermec, and at Tektronix and at Spectra Physics. I hold a number of U.S. patents, including some of the numbers are like 5311000, 540110, 4879456, 496, 719, 519, etc. A big one is 6618162, and if you look at that U.S. patent, you'll find that all of your updates for your computers and things of this sort over the internet is something that I invented back in 1993, so that the updates on your iPhone or on your refrigerator or your computer was something that I did back in my early days as an engineer. I started getting kind of burned out by that and applied for a job as a database administrator. My formal title, though, was data warehouse administrator for a healthcare company that eventually became a Trillium Community Healthcare Plans in Lane County, Oregon. When I applied to work there, it was in November, actually it was October of 2005, and I was hired, and my first day of work, I believe, was November 7th of 2005. When I started, I knew absolutely nothing about medical coding or medical tables or insurance business or healthcare at all. I had always been an embedded systems designer. And so what I ended up doing was just kind of pitching in, and people would, because I was very experienced with databases and knew how to program in SQL, especially T-SQL. And they would give me queries, and once I figured out how the tables were structured, I could run them queries and pull stuff up, and got really quite fast at doing it. I could usually beat most people doing SPSS or other tools with SQL queries on the fly. So I was doing that, and it was an interesting job. And I did that for about a year, and I want to say it was in the summer of 2006. A nurse approached me, and she'd been sent by Terry Copeland, who was the CEO of Agate Resources, which was the parent company of all of this. And I probably need to fall back a second and describe the structure of the corporation to you. Mr. Copeland founded a company called LIPA, which is Lane Individual Practice Association these days. It was called Lane Independent Physicians Association back in 2004. He just changed the name and kept the acronym. It did pretty much the same thing. And you had shareholders that were doctors, around 200 of them. Some of them paid up to $6,000 for a share. I have all of those records, and I'll have to get into that in a little bit because I have limitations on what I can share and what, because of various court orders and also because of HIPAA. But this nurse wanted me to write these queries that for her, and she sat down next to me. And what she was looking for was employees and all of their dependents, meaning their wives and children, for the Monaco Coach Corporation. There were a few female employees, but most of them were males that were working on the assembly line. And what she wanted was the total claims costs for these employees for 2004, 2005, 2006. Up until that date. And what that claim summary was a dollar amount for the employee plus all of their dependents. She pointed out that a lot of the patients had more than one identifier, that most of the children at least were on CHIP, which is the Children's Health program that's sponsored by the federal government, as well as Medicaid. A few were on Medicare in addition to that. And so I had to go find all of their other IDs. They would have an identifier under the Oregon Healthcare Program, Medicare CHIP. They would have a separate identifier for Medicare. Medicare. And then they would have another one for their private, semi-private insurance program for Monaco Coach Corporation. And so I had to look up the claims cost for every single claim under all three of those programs and summarize them all underneath the employee. And that was just an odd report. I couldn't figure out why in the dickens they would want that. And I got to talking with the nurse, and she said, well, Monaco's laying people off. And I went, what? She said, well, nobody knows, so you can't talk about it. But they're planning on doing layoffs, and what they want to know is what who the expensive people are. They called them hotspotters at Trillium. Eventually, there was actually a hotspotter report that was issued for everyone in Lane County, including non-patients. So what they were looking for is who was the expensive employee. There's certain caps on insurance claims, and if it goes over that amount, it falls back on the employer. And I believe it was $40,000 at that time for Monaco. And so really high cost patients would actually cost the company a little bit of money. Now, it's illegal for the company to know who these patients are, except that Trillium was actually running these reports, although it wasn't called Trillium at the time. I need to emphasize that, but I'm going to call them Trillium because they change their name constantly in an attempt to be deceptive. So Trillium was running these reports on a regular basis for not merely Monaco, but for other companies. And the companies in turn were using them to terminate people. But not merely that, they on the side, some of these reports were peddled to credit agencies. So if you were a consumer and happened to be an employee of Monaco or of Seneca or of the Pinnacle Corporation, or if I can, to be really, really blunt, if you worked for Intel or any of a number of other private employers inside of the state of Oregon, your records were out there being sold, and you were going to pay. You would be denied some loans because you were poor credit risk. If you had a child with, say, leukemia, you weren't going to get a loan if the bank thought you were going to take care of your sick child before making a loan payment in a particular month. If you were applying for an automobile loan or for a credit card loan, you would pay 2 or 3 points extra. I had a report of all of that I assembled, as well as the layoff dates for all of those employees. And because I was outraged by this, they asked for this thing twice from me. And I sent that to the Oregon Attorney General's office. I tried to call them a number of times, and they would never pass me through to an attorney.
What year was that, Mike?
I want to say it was 2007, but I couldn't swear to it. I know the date I sent the report. So I tried calling them. In my memory, I tried calling them in 2006. I know that the date of the report itself, because I've got the copy of it sitting here on my computer, I kept it.
So that was Attorney General Hardy Myers.
I don't know who the Attorney General was at that time.
Yeah, it would have been Hardy Myers. Yes.
And one of the things that was really bad about this was that they were hurting these individuals that just happened to have a sick child. It was really disgusting. I did send a copy of this report to Attorney General Rosenblum, and that was in 2014, in June of 2014. She got a complete copy of that and of an additional report where they had all of the individual records for people. That was also sold. So, and that included things like if you happen to have an STD, or you were in an alcohol or drug and treatment center, you, your wife, any one of your children, if you'd gone through a drug treatment program, if you had a nervous breakdown or a psychological problem, the employer got all of that information. So did the banks, so did credit unions, so did insurance underwriters. It covered everything. It was outrageous. And I've got the reports. They're sitting here. The only reason I can't show them to you or give them to you is that the ones that I have are actually underneath a gag order issued by federal judge Ann Aiken. And this has prevented me from even sharing them usually with courts. I have to do it under seal and go through a whole bunch of stuff just to give them to a federal judge. And this was done by Stroh-Reeves, who is Trillium's attorney. But Aiken's reason for sealing this stuff, I believe, is to protect the state of Oregon. She's protecting the attorney general and the governor, both of whom I told about this stuff. In fact, I had legally gone to Attorney General Richardson and showed him the records, and he couldn't.
Attorney General Richardson or Attorney General Rosenblum?
Attorney General Rosenblum. I went to Attorney General Rosenblum, and she didn't follow up on this stuff at all. I went to Secretary of State Richardson when he was elected, and he actually didn't believe it. And he hired an outside auditing firm. It was actually Acuity Forensics. And they went through all of my records, not all of them, but a goodly chunk of the records, and verified that I was telling the truth, that these were authentic records. And they are. The stuff that I've got, I took CD-ROMs, where I've got the CRC checksums for the databases that Trillium had. And I've got date-stamped files. So I've got all of the claims records and everything that are completely authentic. There's no way they could be faked.
Now, that wasn't until 2017 with Secretary of State Dennis Richardson.
Yes.
So, but you had been contacting people for quite some time before that. So,
I was trying to get
the first hotspotter reports were not sent to physicians in the community. They were actually sent to companies.
They were sent to companies. And I'm trying to do this sequentially because it gets way too convoluted otherwise. Right. Just going along with what I had done. And so I was upset about the sale of employee records. They asked me to look for medical fraud, CMS did, because I called CMS and reported what the state had told me, and they said, no, Oregon is underneath federal jurisdiction.
So what year did you contact CMS?
That was in 2007.
So the same time you had contacted Attorney General Hardy Myers' office?
Yeah.
Okay. So how did things go as far as your other contacts with other governmental entities or bureaucratic entities? Who else did you contact?
I contacted the U.S. Department of Justice in 2007. I contacted Health and Human Services, CMS, of course. I contacted the Oregon Secretary of State's office, actually spoke personally with Kate Brown when she was Secretary of State in 2012. In fact, I've got it on my calendar. That was February 10th of 2012, and I spoke with her for about 20 minutes on the phone about a report called the Hot Spotter Report that they were doing at that time. as well as medical profiling, but I'll get into that later. The medical profiling was done specifically on racial grounds. That's what's outlandish about that.
Let's not get off into that rabbit trail quite yet. Let's kind of just focus still on who you're contacting within the government bureaucracy. So you've contacted people at the federal level, Department of Justice, Health and Human
Office.
Resources, or Health and Human Services, HHS.
Yep.
You contacted Hardy Meyer's office. You contacted Kate Brown, and that wasn't until about 2012, and then in 2013, and you spoke with her personally, didn't you?
Yep.
Okay.
Twice, actually.
And then about the same time period, you were also contacting Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum.
Yep. And contacted the Oregon State Audit Division, spoke with them, and in fact, 3.5 years after talking with them, when Stroh Reeves found out that I had the records in a court discovery conference, they actually had the audit division, this was really outrageous, contact me. In fact, I was contacted by 2 different people from the Oregon State Audit Division. One of them was called Tracy Gates, and that was June 6th of 2017. And the other one was Sandra K. Hilton, and that was August 13th of 2015. And they were attempting to get information for Stroh Reeves. And I, unbeknownst to them, I actually recorded the phone calls, and I kept the emails too. So I've got that information. I've got, if we had time even, I could play the Sandra K. Hilton stuff, asking about which federal agencies I'm contacting and which ones I'm talking with. Stroh Reeves went through, and Trillium went through great hoops to try to figure out who I had contacted and who I was talking with and what kind of evidence they had collected from me. And one of the odd things about Stroh Reeves is that they represented Agate Resources, Trillium, LIPA, all of the shell companies, and there's about 30 of them, as well as the individual executives and doctors that were running these scams. But they also represented the state. And so they had a conflict of interest, and so you never knew who in the heck they were trying to collect information on behalf of. It seemingly was both of them at the same time. So they were representing at least those 2, as well as Moda Health, throughout all of this stuff. And just to give you an example of some of the things, and this is getting down in the weeds, so you have to pardon me, is that one of the studies that I ran is I was looking at drugs, at prescription drug abuse. And to make a long story short, is I discovered that a scam that Trillium ran through one of their, actually it was 3 of their shells, was they had fake patients, but they had the same provider, vendor, prescribing and referring provider for these claims to these fake patients. And I went, well, this is odd. These are stark law violations, mind you. It's not simple fraud. It's a special kind of medical fraud covered under the Stark Act. And but it's quite illegal. And they were doing this to make hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud. For example, as far as I can tell, the stuff out of Lane Home Medical was about $14 million in fraud. The stuff out of their mail order pharmacies was millions of dollars more. And one of the things I ran into that was very weird was I found that they were mailing prescription drugs, opiates, as well as some
narcotics,
other recreational drugs.
Narcotics. So
yeah, I don't
things
know
like benzodiazepines and amphetamines,
yeah,
and opiates in particular.
No amphetamines that I could. Maybe I don't know what.
Was there any Ritalin or Adderall prescribed?
Adderall was prescribed.
That's an amphetamine. Yes.
Okay, and then another one was a drug they use for children that have hypertension.
Hypertension?
not hypertension. that's
Hyperactivity?
Hyperactive.
Talking about Ritalin?
Yeah, Ritalin.
Yeah, those are amphetamines.
They were prescribing those, and college students use those because supposedly it improves their memory and ability to study. So they were taking these things during finals week at the University of Oregon. And then the opiates, they sold for roughly $1 a milligram on the streets. And they were mostly hydrocodone, and they would have up to 80 milligram. I realize they were higher, but I don't recall ever seeing one.
Well, the hydrocodone would be either 5 or 10 milligrams, but so Vicodin, hydrocodone, Norco. What you're talking about is actually oxycodone, which they sold as Oxycontin for 80 milligrams, and there's different dosages, but the highest one is 80 milligrams.
Yeah, and they were selling these things, and I've got these records too. They had, and they were to fake patients, and they were around 600,000 pills a month that were actually mailed to as many as 100 patients at a post office box.
Well, let's kind of get back to, again, the politicians and political figures and governmental organizations that you contacted.
Well, no, the reason I wanted to stress this is that
Okay.
this is the kind of thing that Trillium did, that I kept looking for stuff like this. I did not have the medical expertise to be able to read medical codes and to look for kinds of fraud. I had to learn that on the job. All I was observing were things like them selling these illegal drugs to themselves, and then where those drugs went to, I have no idea. I think they probably went to street dealers where they were farmed out and sold for big bucks. But for all I know, they could have been selling them directly. Either way you want to look at it, Trillium is probably the largest drug dealer in the United States, by far.
And you let the politicians know about this. You let the bureaucrats know about this.
Rosenblum knew about it. The Audit Division knew about it. The U.S. Department of Justice knew about it.
How about the Drug Enforcement Agency? Were they made aware?
Didn't call them.
Okay. And so you had contacted a number of politicians. In fact, I think you told me that they had contacted the Oregon. You had contacted the Oregon Health Authority in addition.
Yep.
You
Oregon
contacted
Ethics
the
Commission,
Bureau of Labor and Industry.
Yep.
You had contacted, as you said, the U.S. Department of Justice, and you dealt with somebody up in Seattle, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
What was that
dealt with
individual's
several
name?
people. Well, there was several different people. At OSHA, I dealt with a guy named Toby Kammer, and that was at the Seattle OSHA office, and he actually he would communicate privately with Stroh Reeves. So, as far as I'm concerned, whether it's the case or not, he was complicit with Stroh Reeves in protecting Trillium's continuing this practice, as well as the medical profiling of racial minorities, especially black kids. And just to point out how outlandish that was, is that take a look at referrals for children. White kids, roughly there was a 65% referral rate for medically necessary referrals. The referral rate for black kids was 8%. In other words, 92% of referrals for black children were denied.
Yeah. And we'll get into more detail about that here in just a little bit. So you were contacting these bureaucracies and
about
these
racism, drug dealing, fraud, and most
hotspot reports.
Yep. And I didn't have a lawyer. I couldn't afford one. I finally ended up selling everything I owned and hiring a law firm after I had been fired, and and that's because Agate had actually hacked into my private email, found the reports, attempted to delete them, and to their dismay discovered that what I had done is not merely kept them on my cloud account. I'd actually copied them, made hard copies, as well as made computerized backups.
And what year were you fired?
That was 2013, September 27th.
And we'll get into more detail about that firing, et cetera. So what kind of response were you given by these public servants?
I got the idea that most of them didn't take me seriously because I didn't have a lawyer. A few of them did.
Well, in
I know-
2017, you ran into Dennis Richardson, Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Dennis Richardson,
And he-
took you seriously. And like
Well,
you said,
he took it seriously because I showed up at his office with the recording of Tracy Gates asking me which federal agencies he knew, and she was representing as calling me on behalf of him and of Kip Memott, who was the head of the audit division. And both of them swore up and down that they had never talked with her. And Mr. Richardson actually recorded that meeting, and I've got the recording. So I know everything. I can prove it. It's like if you want to know what was discussed, what Mr. Memott said, what Mr. Richardson said, what I said, it's all on tape. I've got a recording of the entire 3-hour meeting. So, and if you want to know about the audit that they ran, I've got all of it.
so basically the other politicians and other public servants and other bureaucrats just blew you off. Is it because they didn't understand what was going on,
I
or
don't
you think
think
they were
so.
involved with it in some way, shape, or form, or do you think that there's some other nefarious type of situation that's occurring? Why do you think you didn't get a response from these people? And besides a lawyer, because it doesn't seem like you'd need a lawyer to get some type of concern or response from folks when you're trying to report some type of misdeed that's going on, criminal misdeed.
I think that a lot of people don't really care because it's happening to somebody else. It's not happening to them.
Do you think that they had money coming in themselves? Do you think that they had their fingers in the pie?
I don't know. Some of them did for sure. A few of them did not. I think that a lot of them, I mean, in spite of, you'll get things from like Ann Aiken about, and
That's
a lot
federal
of these
Judge Ann Aiken.
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll get a lot
In
of stuff
Eugene.
from these people about, how they care about black people. Same thing with, like right now, one of Stowe Reeves' lawyers that basically gutted me was named Carolyn D. Walker, and she's now working with Black Lives Matter. They have no idea. She threw hundreds of black kids under a bus. I mean, these kids were denied care. Foster kids that were black were denied care. The amount of harm done to black children proves that she knew of it, she didn't care about Black Lives Mattering.
Well, it looks
I
like
care.
It looks like people are going to be aware of it now.
I hope so.
Yeah. So as
But what they have to realize is that if you live in Oregon, you were impacted by this. If you live up here in Portland and you think you got free of it, you're not. I can show you records from a truck driver who came down with leukemia. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know if he was sick. They just knew that they happened to have an increase in their drug prices. They called in Trillium. They found out the name and the disease. It was leukemia that the truck driver had, and they fired him.
who called in Trillium? The company that employed
Yeah.
this gentleman?
Yes.
Okay. Are
And
you
they-
able to say who that company is?
Sure, Conway Freight.
Okay. So they knew that there was a conduit through Trillium to get this kind of information.
Oh yeah.
How do you think people became aware of that? It just became common knowledge among businesses, or?
I don't know. I have no idea of how they knew who to call, but I do know that Trillium was selling this stuff. One of the things that was really fascinating is that Trillium operated, and this is an operation that's fairly typical amongst OHP contractors. They operate more than one database. And in the case of Trillium, they had their front-end database, which is what all of their claims processing was DBF. It's actually IBM System 3, System 5 flat file database. And then on top of that, they used Pascal to write all of the operation software. If you go to Centene or United Healthcare or any of these other companies, they all operate very similarly that
Other
way.
Affordable Care Act
Yeah, they're
businesses.
Affordable Care Act. They're also
benefit managers.
But it's not just that. It's also Medicaid in all of the states. In fact, the Employers Health Alliance and the Alliance, which were agate shell companies, the Employers Health Alliance operated in 37 states. And that was the shell that was ostensibly selling those employee records to Monaco employees to back to Monaco and to other banks and things. This went on in 37 states with thousands of companies, small and large companies, and hundreds of thousands of employees and millions of dependents. It was everywhere. Today, there's an outfit called the Alliance that appears to be acting exactly the same, and it operates in all 50 states.
Who explain a little bit more about the Alliance? What is that?
Well, what you've got is there's different kinds of insurance programs. You got government insurance, and you have regular paid for private insurance. There's a thing called self-funded insurance, and with a self-funded insurance program, the employer basically absorbs the cost as well as the risk for all of their employees. So they assemble their own insurance program. They may have, let's say, 1,000 employees, and it's instead of spending, say, $600 a month sent to some insurance company to cover all their employees, what they'll do is they'll buy a cap, maybe say $40,000, and they'll put in all those employees into a pool, and they'll just cover their health care costs. They may even have an on-site clinic.
Basically self-insured as a business. Yeah.
But it's pseudo self-insured.
Sure, because there's a cap.
Trillium operated a thing called Employers Health Alliance that was a pseudo self-insured program. They sold this thing. So it was packaged up where you gave Trillium a certain amount of money, and then Trillium managed it. They managed not merely the costs and the caps, but also the approvals, the benefit approvals, so that if somebody requested a test for breast cancer, they might deny it because it's medically unnecessary. If someone had back pain and they needed an MRI, they could deny that. And they could keep that up for months, actually, in order to cut costs. And they did. That was a routine thing. I can think of one little girl, a 4-year-old girl who had just an intestinal infection.
And we'll go into her in more detail. So, did Trillium Agate Resources, did they have a sales team? I mean, do you think that they had people there going out and trying to sell this information, saying, hey, we can get this information for you, your company can save money?
Absolutely no doubt at all. In fact, one of the people that was running one of their little subsidiaries was called Apropos Benefits Management. And supposedly the benefits management managed costs so that they would approve or disapprove referrals or authorizations for services. But they also ended up peddling EHA policies, Employer Health Alliance policies, the mail order pharmacy policies, et cetera. And the director of that was a woman named Amanda Cobb. A couple of us DBAs by accident walked in on her dispensing drugs out of a cardboard box in the Willamette room at Trillium. She was a music major. She had no background in medicine whatsoever, and she was taking pills out of boxes and putting them into bottles and looking them up for substitutes in a book. So it's like you had your mail order pharmacy run by a music major who had no background at all, and she was the director of Apropos. The guy who was another officer was the brother-in-law of David Cole, who was the CFO at Agate Resources.
Chief Financial Officer. Okay.
Yep. Another one was, and I don't know who he was related to. His name is like Tryenbaum. He was a doctor. These were buddies of Copeland. And I got a huge long list of them with the amount of money. And again, unbeknownst to everybody else, I've got all of the transaction records. And so when everybody knows about the stock sales, well, I've got the transaction records that show who bought what shares and who was selling shares during the the sale of Trillium to Centene. And that was kind of strange because that actually began back in 2012. And certain insider doctors knew that this sale was pending. And what they were able to do with Copeland was they would go to doctors who didn't know and buy their shares. And some of them were selling for $300, some of them less. As I showed you some of those records. And it's a matter that they were cheating them. The records were worth the shares are worth $2,000 a piece, and they were cheating their fellow doctors out of thousands and thousands of dollars.
So getting back kind of to the politicians, public servants, bureaucratic situation. In 2017, you spoke with Dennis Richardson. You finally found somebody that seemed to want to listen to what you had to say, that took you seriously, had gotten an independent auditor to come out and look at you personally, look at your records, and they found that everything that you had to say was...
He didn't come to me. I actually went, they invited me up to his office in Salem, and when I went to meet with the people from Acuity Forensics, that was also in Salem at the audit division. So yeah, I was at the government stuff, and I had to bring my computers just like I've got them sitting here today with all of the records that I had on them.
So what happened with Dennis Richardson? You had a meeting with him. How long did that last for, and what came out of it?
He was actually, to begin with, he didn't believe what I said, and then once he started looking at the records and he got with Acuity Forensics, and they said, yeah, this stuff's real, and we were able to prove it all. He independently also verified it through a couple of other pals, and I'm not sure of all of them, and called me on the phone and basically said, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't believe you at first, but now I'm just outraged. And he had an audit report written before he got sick and died from brain cancer.
November 2017 that came out, correct?
Yeah, and the state hid that from me. That was not published. It's like I could have used that in my wrongful termination case. I finally got a hold of it and sent it to the court. And right now, Stroh Reeves is trying to have it removed from the records, even though it was based on the information I provided to the Secretary of State. But what he was outraged about was just the amount of fraud that was going on with all of these state agencies. And it was huge. It's like Trillium was paying bribes to people at OHA, and they weren't small amounts.
Oregon Health Authority, OHA.
Yeah. It's like one of them had worked as a lobbyist for Trillium, and she got $1.2 million. Other lobbyists that got tons of money were people like Kevin Neely, who was the number 2 man in the Kitzhaber re-election campaign, and his wife, Kristen Leonard, who became the chief of staff for Kate Brown. You know, the Secretary of State I'd reported all of this stuff to. It's like, this thing stinks. The amount of corruption going on in Salem is unbelievable. And it's people being hurt. It's not just the bribes. It's denying services to people based on money or on race, and telling them that they can't have services. And then they had a thing called the mill that they put them through, where they would continually deny them services, or they would offer them as medically assisted suicide, as they did with a guy named Randy. And he had prostate cancer. He wanted to have chemotherapy. The chemotherapy was $3,000 a month, and Trillium turned him down. He couldn't have simple chemotherapy. It would have taken 6 courses probably to cure it. Instead, they let it sit there until it metastasized, spread outside of the muscle, went into his bladder and into his whole body, into his lungs, and killed him.
Well, not outside
then when
the
he
muscle.
Was dying
spread
in
outside
agony,
the capsule. Yeah.
And then when he was dying in agony, he asked for pain medication because he didn't want to commit suicide. Trillium approved him for medical suicide, denied him painkillers.
Wow. So
they're monsters.
So you went to Dennis Richardson. They came up with this report, this audit report. It came, it was all based upon the Oregon Health Authority. It was an audit of the Oregon Health Authority and CCOs, coordinated care organizations. You say they hid it from you. What do you mean by that? Wasn't that a public report?
I don't understand. No, it was a public report, but I couldn't find it. I kept asking if there was anything to the audits that I had done. This was calling the audit division, calling the Secretary of State's office after Mr. Richardson had taken ill and been replaced, and everybody went, "Oh no, that's we don't know anything about it." So the report itself was kept from me. When I finally got a hold of a copy of it, it was actually from you. And then I finally went in and started backtracking and found out that, yeah, that's the stuff that I had given him, and that's what sponsored it. But it's like they hide this stuff, the state does. And I'm sorry that I'm making them uncomfortable, but it's like there's been some really big players that have been involved in this. I called Senator Merkley's office, and I spoke with, and that's an odd one, is that when I went to the federal courthouse, because Senator Merkley, Senator Wyden, and Congressman DeFazio have offices at the federal courthouse in Eugene. I didn't get a chance to speak with Congressman DeFazio's office with giving him records, but I did with Merkley's office and with Wyden's office. And
what year was that?
That was in 2014.
Okay.
And in Senator Merkley's office, he had his chief of staff, her name was Atkins, Jeannie Atkins, call me, and she spoke with me for over an hour. And mind you, the reason I can say this stuff is that I've got phone records and I record this stuff. So it's like people who think that, I'm just some guy who sits around and will tell them what's, and talk with them on the phone. I don't trust government after what I was through, and you'll understand why as we get into this further, because they let these patients down from 2005 on. My predecessor at Trillium was a guy named Dean Harris, and he had reported the same thing to OSHA. He got fired. They basically destroyed him. And he had been in my position, and he was reporting about fraud, about denial of services, denial of care, medical profiling, some of the same stuff that I'm sitting around talking about right now.
So that was information he was reporting on from like late 1990s, early 2000s?
This was from like 2002 until 2005, and they fired him.
And how did they destroy him?
Oh, what's really awful is that they would have Amanda Cobb supposedly being sexually harassed by him. They did that with 5 whistleblowers, 5 of them at Trillium. And they used the same stupid excuse for 5 whistleblowers, and it was the same woman.
And we know they did that to you, and we'll get more into that later on here. So you contacted 2 federal senators.
I want to say one thing about it, is
Sure.
that in my case, where they really screwed up is that they supposedly had an email exchange, and it was on a day that I had been to a doctor, actually it was 2 different doctors, undergoing tests for cancer, that they had found a mass in my lung, in the lower lobe of my right lung. I was not at work the day that supposedly the emails and the conversations took place. So it's provable that they faked this stuff, but it was unsigned, faked. No one at the court level, no one, not at the state level, wants to look at that. It was faked, and provably faked because there's internal inconsistency. They have an addendum to this one memo email where it's supposed to be a set of code. And what they talk about is a left outer join. And Amanda sends me a demographics report where she's looking for Hispanics, for kids. And the left outer join is a star equal, which is an old syntax. And this was replaced with SQL 2008. It's not valid anymore. So you have to explicitly state left outer join. And they had the newer syntax in this thing rather than the old one. So they took part of my answer and they put it into her question and then had faked the middle of it. And how they ended up doing that, I couldn't figure out for the longest time, and then I finally did. What they do, and I didn't know it, is that you can take a tool from Adobe called Acrobat, and you can grab a PDF and you can clip pieces of it and post them on a piece of paper and create your own email or anything else, and it looks completely authentic, right down to the signature. The state did that. I can show you in a little bit a statement when I went to Boley, where they actually faked my signature by lifting it off another piece of paper and dumping it on this thing. And you know it's not true because, again, unfortunately for them, they have this is supposed to be a filing to Boley. It's a week before the date is a week before they received the filing from the EEOC, which was
EOC?
the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. For this is a federal agency. You file with Boley, whistleblower, and certain types of retaliation complaints. And in this case, it was civil rights retaliation because it was race, religion, age, disability, etc. that Agate was doing. Trillium, and so what I ended up doing was talking with them, because Boley was, and we'll have to get into that too, was acting very weird. They actually had a Stroh Reeves employee talking with me on the phone and didn't think I figured out who in the heck she was. She was supposed to be an official Boley supervisor. Well, she wasn't. She was an aide to the labor commissioner, and she was a Stroh Reeves investigator and attorney.
And what was her name?
Donna Brown.
Okay. So you had contacted a number of politicians, all of them at that point, except for up until 2017, that were Democrats. And I'm not playing partisan politics here. I'm just saying that.
No, that's not true.
Okay,
I
so you contacted
McLean.
some Republicans then too. That's what I was going to
talked
get
with
to.
McLean, who was I believe he was the majority leader or the minority leader of
He
the
was a minority
Republicans
leader, yes.
in the Oregon House. I had talked with and encountered the Farrs, who are Republicans. He's a county commissioner. His wife was actually a lobbyist and communications manager at Trillium. So
And their names again?
Farr.
Again,
Debbie Farr is her name, and his name is Pat Farr. He's a county commissioner down there in Lane County.
Okay. So you
at the risk
contacted.
of jumping around a little bit, and I think it's important to realize this, is the participation of these people in the schemes of Trillium. One of the things that happened because of the hotspotter reports that was sold to doctors, they gave originally, the hotspotter reports were a risk score, the cost of the previous 12 months, of the previous 3 months, the previous 12 months, and back to, I believe it was 3 years. And so they knew how expensive a patient was. And this was originally sold to businesses, but they started peddling it to doctors. And a few insider doctors got a hold of this. And they, of course, they were paid a flat rate, a couple $100s a month to handle. You're a doctor, so you would know whatever it was, but it was a couple $100s a month to handle a Medicare or a Medicaid patient or a CHIP patient. And if it cost more than that, it was liked to because they had some ongoing disease or disorder or mental condition or a drinking problem or a drug problem, etc., it behooved the doctor to not see them if it was going to cost them a ton of money from a straight business standpoint. I mean, I'm not even concerned with the medical ethics of it. I'm just talking about how much money they're going to make.
So what we're talking about here, so initially it was just businesses that were getting these hot spotter reports. But it wasn't long before, as you said, some insider doctors got it. And as with anything, if it's something of value, it's going to get spread out like, hey, buddy, maybe you should take a look at what I got here. Maybe you could
Exactly
utilize
what
this
happens.
too. But this gets into something called capitated healthcare, which means that a person's life is worth so much per month that, especially in regards to something like Medicaid, where the money comes from the government 100% to pay for these, for these patients' lives. So at that point, if I remember correctly, it was about $650 per month per life. And with that money, you were supposed to take care of that patient. But as usual, we're talking about a large pool of patients. So that pool is supposed to dilute the costs, more evenly across the board, so that if someone's, let's say their life is costing $1,200 a month, someone else is only costing $0 per month because they don't have any medical problems or healthcare issues.
Yep.
So that was supposed to kind of even out things so that folks don't lose a lot of money, because that's a concern. You can't sit there and take care of people and be losing money as a business. But they were taking advantage of this in different ways, and we'll get to those, because obviously that money was being siphoned off before it even made it to the patients. So you contacted all these public figures, and until you hit Dennis Richardson, you really didn't get any response from anybody whatsoever.
They would express outrage, just like another county commissioner down there in Eugene when she was a candidate. I actually invited her in and showed her some of the stuff that was going on.
Her name?
Um,
Was it Cush?
Birch, I believe.
Bush, B-U-C-H.
Yeah, and she was elected as a county commissioner, and I pointed out to her one of the things that happened is as a result of this hotspotter reports, doctors were dropping patients, and there was, I believe, 23,000 patients. It could have been 28,000, but I've heard different numbers tossed around, that lost their primary care doctors. And under Medicaid, Medicare, CHIP, that's illegal. You cannot go more than 30 days without a patient having a primary care doctor. If they don't have a doctor, primary care doctor, you're out of compliance and you lose your contract. What Trillium did was they simply lied. They again, this was recorded between Garrett and I on the phone, Garrett Anders, another DBA down there at Trillium, as well as some other conversations.
DBA being a database analyst.
Administrator,
excuse me.
as well as some of the meetings that Patrice Korjenik, who is the COO, Chief Operating Officer at Trillium, where they had doctors dropping patients, and so they had thousands of patients without primary care doctors, and they knew this, they knew they were out of compliance, and all they did was they just simply faked on the reports, even though these doctors had termed, meaning they no longer took Medicare patients because it was costing them too much money. They lied on the reports. So those patients who didn't really have doctors were forced into urgent care centers, so they couldn't receive, because urgent care centers can't give them certain pain medications, and there's no one there to monitor hypertension, like high blood pressure. They had to fake all their records, and that's what they ended up doing. They faked records for thousands of patients.
And the urgent cares,
And this went
speaking
on
of,
for 3 years.
these were shell companies of Agate Resources Trillium Health. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
So that means the money, as usual, with the way this racket is set up, this scam is set up, you've got Agate Resources Trillium Health with all these shell companies, and they're
And
acting as if
LIPA
they're
with doctors, and the doctors are the ones that are operating the urgent care centers.
right. So you've got all these shell companies that all of a sudden are administering. They're not administering. They're actually billing Trillium Health, Agate Resources for their services, but in reality, that money is just going right back into Agate Resources Trillium Health because it's their shell company. And we'll get more into that again as
That
far as the
doesn't even
falsification of
matter.
patients, etc.
None of that matters. All you have to realize is a Stark Act violation. What you've got is owners of LIPA, the Lane Individual Practice Association, who are shareholders of Trillium and of Agate Resources. And these doctors who happen to own sidewalk urgent care centers are, or work in them even, are referring patients to themselves. Get it?
No, explain that a little bit further.
What you've got is you've got Trillium, or so you have this group of doctors that own Trillium. There are about 200 of them. Okay.
Okay.
They're referring patients to other doctors that are in LIPA. That's a stark law violation. It's illegal to do that.
Right.
Really illegal.
So
And
these
been
urgent cares
doing
weren't
this-
owned by LIPA, or they weren't owned. I mean, they might have been owned by someone
Some
within
were.
LIPA, but they weren't owned by Agate Resources Trillium Health.
It depends. Some were, some were not.
Okay.
If you go to like Lane Home Medical, that was owned by Agate Resources, and that was wheelchairs, walkers, test strips for diabetes.
Medical supplies.
Yeah, medical supplies as well as drugs.
But they weren't in urgent care. I was speaking specifically to the
urgent
urgent
care?
cares. Were those owned by Agate Resources, or were they just kind
Some
of
them,
physicians
some of
that
them
were
appear to
associated
be
with
owned
LIPA?
by but I won't swear to that. I don't know.
Okay.
It's hard to track some of this stuff. It's like I didn't realize that Copeland owned Select Care until I was told it by him when he was bragging. He owned Select Care and he had it managed by a couple of other doctors.
And Select Care is what?
Another medical insurance company. He also owned another one.
CCO?
Pardon?
Is it a CCO?
Yeah, it is now.
Okay. What was it before? Just
It was Lane County's largest private insurer at one time. It was huge
You
and
mean like
very
a-
popular.
you mean like a Blue Cross Blue Shield type of insurer?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
and Copeland owned it. And there's other insurance things like I don't know, home feeding things, home supply, home medical operations. They're owned by Copeland all the way up into the Portland area. The companies are just like Evergreen Health Services. There's stuff that's just crazy, and that was just in Oregon. That goes across state lines too. It's like Agate Resources. Although no one wants to pay any attention to this either, operated in California and Texas and in other states. So did Lane Home Medical, the one that was committing all of this fraud. Operated in a half a dozen different states at least, but it was hidden, a lot of it. You didn't know. They also had Agate was operating as a Nevada corporation and as a Delaware corporation and offshore with CT Corporate Services, which was actually running it out of Holland. And so there's no telling how much money disappeared offshore. There was the amount of fraud was astonishing, but to be really blunt, the fraud was something that didn't bother me that much. I mean, yeah, I didn't like the idea of our tax money disappearing, and no one does. I mean, it right now it ticks me off because if the state of Oregon recovered the fraud that Centene owns, the $2.2 billion in fraud from Trillium alone, that's all recoverable right now, it would pay off the hole in the state budget. There's no reason for one state employee to lose their job right now. Not one of them. We could plug the hole in the state budget. We could make that state budget whole. $2.2 billion. There's no reason. And in fact, it's triple damages so they can handle it for the next, foreseeable future.
Well,
we can
I
ride
suspect-
out this recession and everybody could have pay raises if we wanted to.
Well, that's the thing, is giving more money to an addict and a junkie is, in the government I consider to be a junkie, just increases their habit. I'm not so sure that's the best way to put our tax dollars, but yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I'm just saying that I guess I'm not quite so, in spite of the fact that I had really bad experiences with some government employees at the audit division. I think that most people are just hardworking and honest and want to do the right thing. And I don't, especially in the present economy, the idea of what we're looking at, 30% layoffs of state employees, a lot of them running parks and recreation and children's programs, just turns my stomach. We don't have to lay off one of them. They don't have to be laid off. If the state did the right thing and collected the money that Trillium defrauded them from, provably, you've got the records, they wouldn't have to lay off one of those people. They'd have money to fund schools completely. They could give everybody raises if they wanted to. There's plenty of money out there just clawed back from Centene. Centene bought them. They bought that house of cards. And when they had the hearing to buy it, I wrote a letter and told them what was going on. That's public records. They know all about this. Centene does. Make them pay. You can get the money out of them.
Well, the unfortunate part, it seems, from speaking to you over the past, 3 months, is that the people that could make this happen are dirty in so many different ways that might curtail them from trying to pursue this, because anytime there's dirt on you, you don't want to, at least the politician doesn't seem to want to expose that to the public.
I don't do politics.
I know. But otherwise, that seems to be one of the things that is preventing them. But also, it seems like these politicians might have their hand in the till. Also, what do you think about that?
I know of, Kitzhaber got money. Brown, I know, has taken a ton of money. Rosenblum, the records seem to show she got money. I know of people at the Oregon Health Authority that were paid a great deal of money.
Now, are you talking about just campaign contributions, or are you talking about?
Oh no, they had
personal
bribes.
money? Okay.
We actually had a woman from the Oregon Health Authority that came down and attended board meetings, and she was in charge of, I can't remember what the thing was, but it was new pilot programs that were experimental. And she would just show up and to these every single board meeting that they had at staff meeting actually too, that they had down there at Trillium, and they paid her money. She got hard cold cash, and there's a half a dozen of them that actually saw it happening. I mean, they paid her cash money. It wasn't a check. It wasn't shares like Rhonda Busick got. It was cash money. Rhonda Busick had worked for Trillium, so there was that excuse. But and
then she went over to the Oregon Health Authority.
She went over to the Oregon Health Authority as an executive, and I could see back in September of 2013 where she owned about $1.2 million in shares, and that is almost any other state in the union. That's illegal. I mean, you cannot have a government employee owning shares in a private company, and you also cannot, as a government employee or as an elected employee, you are not allowed to legally accept money, much less solicit it. From a state contractor.
What year did she leave Trillium Health? Was it 2013, 2011?
No, it was like 2010.
2010. So she was supposed to divest herself of all those shares of stock.
And didn't.
And didn't. And then she went and worked over at the Oregon Health Authority, and she was there during the time period that this audit was going on. Now, I certainly, from what I've seen, and I know from what you've said, you can't say that she had a direct hand in how that audit was handled. It wasn't just singularly about Trillium Health.
Put it this way, she was one of the ones that signed off on the audit that Richardson set in, and she signed off saying, no, we won't do any more fraud. We will now watch out for it, essentially for the Oregon Health Authority. So it's like this audit report's really interesting because it's a bunch of people essentially admitting that they had been doing wrong for years, and all of a sudden they're going to stop. They're going to cease and desist because the Secretary of State called them on it.
Now, during that audit, there was quite a bit of pushback to Secretary Dennis Richardson. They were not cooperating. They were withholding documents. They were.
It was much worse than that. When this woman from QD Forensics would go in and do the audits at the Oregon Health Authority, they actually took employees, like 6 to 10, and would follow her around, actually get in her way. Legally she could look at the records. They basically got her in a way to make it impossible to actually focus on the records to do anything, because they were there bugging her the whole time. I mean, they interfered with every step of what she was doing. That's when it was under Lynn Saxton. I don't know what it's like now. And there, you want another Republican? Lynn Saxton. There you go, another Republican. And I had spoken with her, wrote her personal letters, told her of the fraud, sent her records. She knew all about all of this stuff.
And that was what year? Because she was put in place in 2015, wasn't she?
No.
2014, because Mark Abrams had left in disgrace at that time as the head of OHA.
Yep.
And she was put in by Kitzhaber,
Yep.
which makes it seem kind of fishy just from what we know about John Kitzhaber and what he was involved with. It makes it fishy that he's picking someone like her to take such an important position that's has control, immense amount of control over these CCOs that were involved with criminal activities that were, paying money. At least Trillium was paying money to John Kitzhaber.
And there's a whole bunch of people that were around Kitzhaber that were like that, like Louis Savage, Callie is another one. These people were all, and then Callie came and served as the insurance commissioner after Savage left.
You're talking about her first name. What's that again? Lauren Cali, Kali. Now it's Lauren Cali Robinson.
C-A-L-I, I believe.
Is it C-A-L-I? Okay.
I'm not sure.
Maybe it is. But now it's Lauren Cali Robinson. She's married now. And they brought her in at age 31 to be the Oregon Insurance Commissioner.
Yep.
With no experience whatsoever in that field whatsoever.
Nope.
It just makes it it makes it very suspicious that they're putting people into place to keep this scam running.
Well, what's really interesting is that after Trillium got caught with some of this stuff, and I reported it, they had and they were trying to peddle off Trillium to the Centene Corporation. It was difficult to do it because Trillium was actually owned by all of the shareholders. If you go, the records that I've got show that in 2008,
the LIPA shareholders.
Yeah, the LIPA
Lane
shareholders.
Independent Physician Association. If you were part of LIPA, then you actually were part owner of Trillium too.
Only after 2008. Up until 2008, they weren't.
Okay.
Then all of a sudden, and they had a 17-to-1 stock split where they got a whole bunch more shares. And so it was a pretty lucrative offer to these doctors. And so they went along with it. Well, they were the voters and owners of Trillium. And then what was really interesting is that when it came time to sell, because they were shareholders, Centene bought all of the outstanding shares. So essentially they assumed all the risk as well as the ownership of Agate Healthcare, Lane Individual Practice Association, and Trillium.
So sort of like Bayer with Monsanto. When
But
Bayer bought out Monsanto, they took on all the risk associated with Monsanto, and that's why they're getting sued now.
It gets weirder than that. What they did was they got really clever. I pointed out that what they were doing was it's a false conveyance. And so what they did is in the official hearing, they said, oh, well, Trillium doesn't actually have any employees, does not own a facility, does not own a building, has nothing. It's an empty shell. All the employees are actually employees of Agate Resources, and Agate Resources leases them and leases administration to Trillium Community Healthcare Programs. So it was really quite clever, and that's another one that they kept secret. But I happen to have the actual record of it, and I could even tell you what it is in case the audience wants to look it up because it is so fascinating to read.
So while you're looking that up, going back to the audit that was done by Secretary Richardson, there was some pretty and you spoke to it, and that there was a lot of pushback in regards to people being monitored. Basically, the people that were administratively higher up were monitoring the other people within Oregon Health Authority that were being questioned by the auditors.
Yep.
So I read through that, and as you said, I found that online. I found that a couple of months ago, and I'm not even really sure how I found it, but it just kind of popped up. But I read through it, and it's a very damning report. And to say that things have changed, it's really hard to say that, because once Secretary Richardson died of his brain tumor in 2019, there isn't a snowball's chance in hell that there's going to be any audit done anytime too soon with who we have in power right now.
Well, in March of 2018, Secretary Richardson called me at home about, I want to say it was around 7:30, and he's out of state at a meeting. And there, the reason that's interesting and stands out is that there are a number of people at my house that evening, and we were actually it's kind of sounds odd, but that's one of the primary topics of conversation. And I can get into more of that when I talk about my fly tying classes in the Dr. Sottenspiel.
Sure.
I had
What was a primary topic of conversation?
It was Trillium and the fraud that they were committing, and how I ended up getting harmed by the state for trying to do the right thing. And it's provable. That's why it's so hard to understand. A good example, that thing I told you about, the filing by Bully. This thing is
the whistleblower
represented
filing.
Yeah, they said this is the complaint that I filed with them, and it's dated January 13th. Well, they couldn't have filed it January 13th because the claim from the EEOC doesn't land on Bully until January 23rd. Furthermore, this thing has 2 audit stamps. It's got 10 things, an audit stamp, then 3 more items, and the same copy of the audit stamp again. Nobody does that, and it's illegal. So it's like no auditor would do this. And so you've got this fake statement by Bully filed 10 days before the actual thing then comes down. It gets worse than that. I've got a recording with Bully attorney Jeremy Wolf on March 3rd of 2014, where he's talking about the whistleblower retaliation complaints that I'd filed with him that are completely missing from this supposed January 13th filing. Whistleblower retaliation complaints, a Family and Medical Leave Act retaliation, HIPAA violation, Sarbanes-Oxley, Affordable Care Act, etc. So there's all these specifics that are discussed by a Bully attorney with me before the filing deadline, and then you've got this fake thing from Bully. What the heck is Bully doing filing a fake report like this?
Now, what year was that again?
This is between 2013 and 2014.
So you were dealing with a Mr. Wolf. What was his first name?
Jeremy Wolf.
Jeremy Wolf. So he showed you you filed a whistleblower complaint. You wanted protection, and they said that they were going to do that. You saw that Mr. Wolf had this complaint put together, and then the next thing you know,
supposedly had filed them.
And supposedly had filed it, and the next thing you know, Mr. Wolf is missing, and the papers that were supposedly filed are missing. He's working for someone else within the government now, right? He's still a government employee, just a different department or a different agency.
He's working for a completely different court system.
Okay. And the next thing you know, he's missing, the report's missing, and they're telling you that you never spoke to them even on the phone.
Yeah.
And here you've got a recording of all the conversations.
And what's really crazy about it is Aiken and Stroh-Reeves. You want to know what their answer to this is? Even though I've got
Judge
metadata
Aiken, yes.
is to file motions to have the evidence precluded.
They have a what?
Precluded, have it stricken from the record. Even though it's a recording with metadata, provable what it is. You got the recording equipment, you got everything, the original recording, and their reaction is to A, ignore it, and then B, to try to strike it from the record.
Now, you said you thought that the judges were trying to protect the government. Do you think that they're trying
They
to...
are in the Oregon District Courts, and I can show you how.
Sure.
A good example is I went in...
But do you think that they're protecting people individually, or do you think that they're protecting money for the state, or both?
Both.
Do you think they're protecting themselves?
Yes. Aiken is a good example. One of the things that happened is she attempted to appoint when I first filed this case, I filed it as a pro se litigant because I spent up every dime I had. I was penniless. Was surviving on Social Security. I'd been injured on the job just prior to getting fired.
And we'll get into that, but go ahead, yes.
I had, my foot was crushed. A media cart rolled on it, fell on it, and crushed my left foot. My right foot had already been broken. So I was in a cast most of the time. And it was really, it was awful, but I couldn't walk. And it's like, I don't even know if it'll show up on the, this is a picture of my feet. And I'm not sure if you can see, but it's swollen about 50% larger than normal.
Well, you can see it fairly decently, yeah. They definitely look swollen.
And it turned purple, and those scars on the top is when the bone shoved through the top of the foot when it shattered. This is at work.
Did you ever have those been repaired as of
No.
yet? Okay.
I filed for workman's compensation. Trillium tore up the form, I think it's an 802, 803. I filed for workman's comp, literally ripped it up. And prior to that, they wanted me to bring back an MRI showing that this injury had happened. So I was kicked out of the office. This is on September. You have to pardon me if I try to do this off the top of my head, I'll end up getting a wrong date.
No, that's
and
okay.
then somebody will come back and go, oh, he lied because he had the date wrong, and I don't want to play that game. I was sent out. Oh, there you go. I was phoned on September 9th. The doctor phoned me on September 9th and said, this is the MRI results. It's all wrecked up. Also on September 9th, I got a call from the eye doctor that I had needed another eye surgery for a detached retina. On September 12th, Patrice Korjenik and Annette Woods kicked me out of the office. Said I had to go get them the MRI report and the ophthalmologist report. So I had to go get those two reports and bring them back before I was allowed back in the office. Gave them to them, went to work. On the 13th, over lunch, I called the U.S. Department of Justice, the ADA, American with Disabilities Act section of the Department of Justice about all of this stuff that was going on that I thought it was wrong. On September 16th, at 8 o'clock in the morning, they called me into Human Resources and said, we're going to put you on administrative leave for an undisclosed reason. And I went, well, this is crazy. On September 7th, you have me calling U.S. Health and Human Services again, saying, I think they found out that I'm a whistleblower. On the 18th, I had to go to a doctor, and I wrote them a letter about the injuries. That becomes important because I had to do a weekly status report. And I sent them my weekly status report on Wednesdays. And so what Trillium did is they went through and took all of the status reports that I filed with them over the years and destroyed them, in spite of the fact that they had a spoliation letter.
What do you mean by status reports?
They had to file a weekly status report saying I'd been to the doctor for the injury on this date. This is what I accomplished for work tasks, etc.
Okay.
Korjenik wanted it, and she wanted it because if you go back to 2012, on October 3rd of 2012, I stood up in a staff meeting and spoke out. It was on HIPAA, required staff meeting, education thing, and it had about 35 people. And I stood up at that and complained about the patient profiling, the hotspotter reports, and a bunch of the illegal activities that Agate was engaged in. And the result of that was that Korjenik yelled at me in the meeting, threatened to fire me on the spot. After the meeting, she hauled me to her office. I was pulled out of IT, information technology, and made to report directly to her for about 4 hours. And then she signed me to work for Amanda Cobb, which is just as bad. So I worked for the analytics group, but I had all of my old tasks. It gets worse than that. Even though I had a broken foot and had this mass that had been found the previous month in my right lung, they made me from non-exempt, meaning they had to pay me under contract for working more than 40 hours. They switched my job title to exempt so that I was not qualified for overtime at all, and then worked me 80 hours a week, including weekends. I was commonly, even though I couldn't drive because both feet were rucked up at various times, they had an employee stop by and pick me up in my home in Coburg, drive me to work. There they would stick me at work all day long. I couldn't do anything. It was worse than that. I was in a wheelchair at the time, and they would not accommodate a wheelchair. So they put me in an office chair, one of those little office chairs, like this one I'm in right now with the wheels. And I had to wheel myself around in that stupid office chair. And I would go to my cubicle and work all day long. Korjenik wouldn't let me leave. I would sit there all day long. And about 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night, she would go, okay, well, you're done. Everybody else was gone. And the first time that happened, I went, how am I supposed to get home? And she went, not my problem. And I literally had to call upon friends or take a cab to get home from the job. They refused to let me telecommute, which they had done before. But once I ended up speaking out at that staff meeting on October 3rd of 2012, telecommuting ended and they started harassing me. I'm Native American and I was called chief, a drunk. I don't drink at all. They kept making accusations about asking Amanda Cobb out to a wine bar for drinks. I don't drink alcohol. I don't like alcohol, for one thing. I'm Native American. Alcohol is poison to us. I avoid it.
And what tribe are you associated with, Mike?
Blackfoot and Northern Shoshone.
And you're a member, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so they took advantage of a gentleman with disabilities.
Oh, and
that was a minority.
The racism was, it was virulent. My relatives at Fort Hall, because these people were from Idaho, were called
like Amanda
drunks.
Cobb.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
They were called drunks. We were called criminals. I mean, it's like my relatives were disparaged. I was disparaged for being, this Indian thug.
Didn't you say they felt the same way about other minorities, though, too?
Oh, they really didn't do so much to other minorities, and I'm not convinced to this day. People have asked me, do you think they were racist? I honestly don't know.
It seems like from some of the referral rates that they're racist.
Well, the referral rates and how they treated people, especially Black and Native American
and Hispanics.
Was awful, and Asians.
And even whites were treated poorly if they were poor.
Not compared to.
Not as bad, but even so, I mean, the kids that were foster kids that were Caucasian, they didn't get that much better referral rate than the blacks, the Hispanics, or the the other minorities,
Over a 3-year period,
Native Americans.
when I was looking at, and this was one of the ones that I talked about on that October 3rd meeting, they had cesareans. You know what a cesarean section is, or a cesarean delivery?
Well, sure, C-section, yeah.
And they had
Everybody does.
over about a 5-year period, they had 43,000 of these things that they had records for whites, and they had 5 of them that were that ended up going home early, and no reason known why.
When you say early, you mean like the same day as a C-section, correct?
Yeah, which is major surgery. I mean,
Yeah,
and that's kind of like, that's really ugly.
That's pretty ugly just for having a baby, let alone a C-section. Yeah.
For Native Americans, 26% of them were done as an outpatient. The prenatal care was so lousy, more than half of them ended up going to emergency rooms for their C-section. They didn't know. They ended up in the emergency room at the hospital, and that's where they had their baby. And then half of them ended up getting shipped home that day, outpatient. Try that one. That's racism.
Yeah.
Black people were treated almost as bad. Hispanics were even worse.
Yeah. Well, let's take a little break here, Mike.